Hello, my name is Jeff Gemiello, and today I'm going to talk about problem solving from an authentic person's point of view. I'm an authentic person, and this is really how I solve problems. It'll sound weird, but the more authentic you become, the more it makes sense. Authentic people generally think differently. They don't think, I don't like to say ordinary people, but most people get distracted a lot by a lot of things. The bread and circuses of the world. Sports, TV shows, actors, actresses, movies. Generally, an authentic person, they may watch it briefly for entertainment, but they don't really fixate on it. They don't set their life by it. If you put a gun to their head and say, "Hey, name me 5 actors," they'd really stumble and try to find 5. It's just not something that they actually care about. And their thought process usually is far removed from that. Usually when authentic people, as you go through the process of being more authentic, what happens is your brain kind of, let's just say reprograms itself. And you can see my dog. Kita's saying hello. And the reason I say reprogram yourself is because if you think about your brain as a computer, if you go to your computer right now, you go to your resource monitor, whether it's Windows, Macs, or Linux, whatever, you go there and you watch it. Sometimes nothing's happening, it's just idling, and it'll just randomly have CPU going. It really is how your brain operates. Your brain likes to keep busy. So it'll keep fine-tuning things. And in the authentic world, you represent yourself as you. Everything is more about truth than anything else. If I lie to you, it means I have to remember these lies. But if I tell you the truth, I only have to remember the truth. That means I have all this extra memory power to use somewhere else. It's kind of logic in it. And what happens is because you're not using, memory recall a lot, you don't really need it that much. Or think of it another way, it takes a lot of creativity to make lies, and people lie a lot. So if you don't really lie a lot, or you don't tell lies, you kind of reserve that creativity for something else. And that's the problem, is your brain says, okay, well, you're not using it for here, let me use it somewhere else. And you'll start being more creative, whether it be in your passion or whatever it may be. You'll be more creative in general. And sometimes when you really don't use it a lot, you'll switch to other things, whether it be problem solving or more analytical work. Anytime you can drag your brain away from anything heavily emotional is a good thing, because the world seems to like us in fear right now. Everything's in fear of this, fear of that. And they call it, they even got a name for it. It's called fear porn at this point. And really, it's just they're programming you to live in fear and to keep riveting onto them, which is the source of their revenue, obviously. That's what the news is. That's why the first thing you do when you're an authentic person is you really don't watch the news anymore, because you already understand the news. The news it's really not going to tell you anything you don't already know. Usually the paper is a little better, maybe, depending on your local paper. But either way, authentic people think differently, very differently. And the closer you get to authentic, the easier it is for you to think. You're more focused. You have an easier time focusing. A lot of people who are authentic are actors. They're artists. They're engineers. I said they're not real big on the social side of life. I almost say it. They're like closet geeks, I swear. But, or nerds, I guess, back in my day. It doesn't really matter, actually, because from a problem-solving perspective, slowly over time, a person that's authentic changes his own skills in his brain to process things more efficiently. And it seems weird, but realistically, think about it. Your brain doesn't like to be idle, so it kind of makes up things. Difference is it enhances things every day. It's like some people have prophetic dreams. A lot of people have, once you start becoming more authentic, okay, usually you raise your vibration, and usually in the process of raising your vibration, you get a lot of prophetic dreams, or a lot of more dream activity, period. And dream activity could be anything. It could be your spirit guides talking to you. It could be God talking. It could be actually prophetic. If here's what's going to happen to you. Or it could not have anything to do with you all. It could just be this is the way it's going to happen in the world. Anyway, this is actually about problem solving, not actually about authentic people. One of the interesting things that I've found in life is my thinking is not sequential, and not just it's not sequential. It's my problem solving is not sequential. And let me give an example. Being a computer programmer, I do a lot of computer programming work, and boss will come up to you and say, "How long does it take to do this?" And your initial instinct says, "Oh, it'll take about 2 hours." I go, "Oh," and then you think of a reason why it would take longer. And usually the reasons are pretty varied. It could be anything from there's people in the office, and they're gonna ask me questions, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do that, or they're going to socialize, blah blah blah. So the number you give is more like a drop dead. This is the maximum number I need to give. So you'll quote your boss 2 weeks. He's like, "Okay, can you go do that then?" And then you go and you'll start working on it. And most people will sit there and just chew at it, sit there and just brainstorm, I guess you could say. And I go, that's a problem. I go, because brainstorming really doesn't work. One moment. And the reason I say brainstorming doesn't work is that when you sit there, you're putting an awful lot of pressure on you. And we make horrible decisions when pressure is put upon us. What I've found that works really effectively is to think of things in chunks. So literally, I non-sequentially look at this. I go and say, okay, well, I kind of got a baseline of where I'm going to start. And I go, okay. And then I go over and I'll move on to something else, not related at all. To the point where it's almost mind-numbing, you could say. But still in programming, it could be related to this or not. But it's usually very mundane. And your brain's like, no, I don't want to do this. And it screams. Now the problem you wanted to work on looks a lot better to your brain. So it's silently working on that while you're doing something else. When I worked from home, actually, I would actually do laundry or dishes. Or sometimes walk the dog. That would usually help free it up, because halfway through the process, your mind is like, I don't want to do this. I want to be active. So it'll actually start coming up with solutions. Here's plan A, here's plan B, here's plan C. It will come up and find them for you. But nonlinear thinking, I've had to explain to my boss before, is, it'll take me 8 hours to go do something. I just can't guarantee it'll be in a row. And he'll give me like a dirty look. And usually like 2 days, and then he'll have the project done. And it's because there's no guarantee that I actually have the time to do it all at once. And secondly, sometimes you need that break. Because the break gives your mind something to think, to obsess about something else about, so you can go back to what you were working on. Very weird, but when you're an authentic person, sometimes you also still need a break. And it's actually really funny to explain to your boss how all this quoting of time is kind of like hysterically funny, because you make bad decisions when you're up against a deadline. I'll guarantee you, if you put a gun to my head right now and said, program this, it'll be the worst piece of junk you ever wrote. Because it's not going to be what you wanted. It'll be something that'll get me, survive. And that's currently the problem in software we have right now with Agile, is everything is so constrained by time. Of this sprint has to be done during this sprint. We write horrible code constantly. And there's no refactoring of the code because, we don't got time for that. And you don't got time for that. You live with garbage. You will always have garbage. But anyway, it's not about software. It's about solving problems. As I said, we make very bad decisions when under pressure. And what I've learned in my life is that good ideas just flow, and they're not stagnant. What I mean by that is when you start working with something and you start thinking about it, you start coding or whatever you're working on. You'll start working on it, you'll hit a roadblock. You're like, Usually what I do is I sat there, I think about it for a second, I go, well, obviously the idea or the mental process I'm using went stale. I delete it all and start fresh. And I can hear you screaming right now. I go, that's wasteful. No, it's not actually, because the second iteration that you did that, it may have took you a day to get to where you were. Now it took you 2 hours to get there. And you have a different stuff. And because you already optimized it in your brain, a different mechanism to doing it. And because you reworked it, you usually get a different result coming out the other end, because you know that first time it didn't work. And you know what path you went to get there, follow the dots. And you didn't get there. Now you're getting closer to there. Usually 3, maybe 4 iterations I usually have. And they could be actually very quick. And it could also be that you don't have to get rid of everything. But you may need to start over. That's sometimes the case. You just have a bad start and need to restart it again. It sounds crazy, I said, but usually the final end product's you'll be a lot happier with. It usually flows better. You seem to like it, and it's usually more maintainable. And I have a feeling that works for any process, not just computers. If I was designing a process for McDonald's on how to make food go better, or a restaurant for how to food go better, it would be the same thing. You have to keep working different angles to get one that works all right, and then kind of tweak it a little bit. And a lot of times it's baby steps. In my problem-solving experience, I've had all kinds of crazy problems to solve. I've learned that if you can reliably do baby steps, one step at a time, you'll get to your destination. And what I've found, especially with agile development, is people have forgotten what the word agile actually means. Agile actually means the ability to change rapidly. And for those that are not involved with software, agile is a mechanism where you have a plan, a 2-week plan in which you do something, and you do it. Either you make it or you don't. You have to kind of do your thing at that point. But basically, the logic behind it originally, was designed by developers to be productive. And the logic is if for some reason management gave us bad information, in 2 weeks we can be on a different path again. A different one. In other words, if we went down a bad path, 2 weeks later we can be on a new path correcting that. So there's a correction mechanism, you could say, in that. Unfortunately, when management kind of gets the hold of things, the numbers start to get, we have to be on schedule, and just makes it worse and worse. And that's usually where agile falls apart. I personally, my entire life live agile. My life itself is agile, which means I actually plan per month. I'm gonna do this month, and I'm gonna spend this many hours doing this many hours doing that, and I'm usually pretty good at that. But the idea behind it is good ideas just flow, and bad ones kind of make you stagnate. Back when I was in college, when I was working with computers, people I worked with that I kept throwing code away so much that they want my recycling bin. Just give me your code. Don't delete it. Just give it to me, because it's good code. It was not my thinking. And the good news is, as you go through the process, your brain, especially being authentic, your brain slowly changes how it thinks, because you're fine-tuning your problem-solving skills just for that task. And that's what people don't get, is you're constantly improving your skills. Constantly. And that's a good thing. That's actually a really good thing. It's kind of sometimes scary because, imagine going to bed and then waking up the next day and your thinking is slightly different. Because while you were sleeping, your brain thought about it and said, I could solve this problem better if I thought more this way. And you kind of slowly drift that way a little bit. And it's a very slow drift. So it's like, if you're working on the same type of problems for a couple weeks will drift over. And you'll find out your relationships actually notice that too. So, you're never quite the same person. So in a way, they can't take advantage of that easily because your thinking just keeps changing a little bit. But oddly enough, a side tip, what I've noticed about problem solving and relationships is that sometimes you have to give people the ability to be wrong. Sounds like an odd statement, but a lot of people like to say, I told you so. To me, it's never been about I told you so. It's more important that actually you understand where I'm coming from and we're thinking in the same pattern or the same way than it is anything else. In other words, if I'm communicating with you, I said, I don't think that's right, that's wrong. It's more important that you acknowledge and kind of fix your issue and be on the right path than it is for me to be right. I don't care if you ever tell me I'm right. Just fix your behavior, because ultimately the relationship's going to end because of your bad behavior, not because you told me that I was right. Think of it that way. It's a very high road kind of thinking, which a lot of people don't have. Just like everything in problem solving is, especially when it's a very complex problem, you're dealing with a game of connect the dots. How do I get from here to here? 15 different dots going that way. I don't know what the connections are. There's a lot of mechanism. The one I've generally found effective is the top down, where you look at the high level first, break it out into chunks, and once you got those chunks identified, you flip the other way and you go from low level up within the chunks. Usually that works for me anyway. I don't know about other people. But that is problem solving. I said it's a little bit different for people who are authentic because we don't have a lot of the clutter that everyone else does. People who are not authentic, a lot of times they don't even have creativity anymore. Not to sound creepy, but authentic people generally have creativity. Non-authentic people generally don't. And they had it at one time, usually, if I remember correctly, the Lord told me that the first thing when trouble is brewing in a soul, it take away the creativity. Which makes sense because when you're going to do mischief, we don't want you to do mischief in creative ways. In other words, we want you to go over and consult other people and give them the ability to either talk you out of it or use the same boring ideas over and over again. Think of it that way, in a sick way. But creativity is usually the first thing to go. Don't get me wrong; you can always get it back. You can get it back, and it's a struggle because you actually have to change your life and why you do things. And I said, usually to lose creativity, usually I had to abuse it for something. You see that a lot right now. A lot of foolishness with AI. Like people will go over and make a book, a children's book no less, and use AI to make it. I go, whoa, so let me get this right. You're so bankrupt of ideas. You're so non-creative that you can't think of a small storyline involving maybe a couple animals that did something and make it kind of maybe funny or have a moral story at the end. You can't figure any of that out. I'm not talking, the pictures. I'm talking the actual storyline. There's AI using AI to make children's books. Not the painting side, but the actual story. And it's horrifying. It's like you are already gone. Your brain's already gone. But that's judging, and I shouldn't be judging. But I shouldn't be surprised, because actually in the computer field, actually 95% of us will lose our jobs. Oh, sorry, 95% of them will lose their jobs. I generally won't. And the reason I won't is I'm different than they are. They literally, kids out of school, they keep pumping them out of school. And remember I told you, I've literally skirted every major, control system in my life. School was one of them. I went to college to learn computers and find out I have nothing to do with these people. I know more now working in the field doing it than by the education that I'm getting. It's like, no, this is garbage. It's not worth my money or time. So I went off. But they teach them to be obedient, and that's translating to, well, go to Google and get the answer. So you got a lot of people who are just using Google to get their answers, and they're really not solving any problems. They're just regurgitating. They're doing what AI is doing. AI does nothing more than take whatever Google had and puts a little bit of logic to it and uses it. So really, if you ask yourself at this point, if you're being replaced by AI, you need to change your occupation, because you're not in the right occupation. And the reason I say I'm a little different in that is I had to learn computers from the ground up, because there was no computers when I first got started. Mainframe computers were big, and there was books around the house. My stepfather was a software developer at the time. He was an accountant, actually, that went for 90 days, went to school to learn computers. So he had all these books about how computers are organized, programming languages, and boom, boom. So he had all this stuff at home, and of course, I read them. And I was fascinated by them, because these are systems. These are not computers, these are systems. So I learned how to work with systems. I learned how it all worked from the ground up, from the light bulb to the relays to the transistors. Because when I went to high school, I took electronics, so I know how they physically worked. And it was amazing. It's like, oh yes, that light bulb just goes. Inventor 101. So it was natural that I was going to go into computers. I was going to go into some technical field. But nowadays, people don't know the most basic things. And as I said, AI does one thing horribly badly: think on its own. I'm sure eventually they'll get it to think on its own. I go, but until then, someone has to debug something that doesn't work. Because AI does not understand that it doesn't work. It doesn't understand a bug. So it's always perfect. It doesn't understand a bug. So humans, we have to delicately tell it it's wrong. But we tell it without really destroying the entire world, because if that's wrong, all this stuff must be wrong. It's kind of the logic AI uses. But anyway, I digress a little bit on that one. But a lot of industries are going to be pinched by the AI thing. To be blunt, it doesn't matter really which field you look at. I have a feeling that approximately half the jobs out there are going to be gone within the next 2 years anyway. Just poof. If you're a government employee, you kind of were blowed anyway. If you're manufacturing, you're probably going to be replaced by robotics, more robotics. Because when times are tight, you save money. And businesses save money by maximizing their profits and saving money, and humans are usually the most costly item. Hard to believe, only back in the 20s were actually labor cheap. Other than that, it became very expensive all year round, ever since. And people are remembering that. So you're going to see, like now, you're seeing a lot of people not going to college anymore. Now they're whining that, people aren't going to college. Why would you want to go to college? I can make more money not going to college. A lot of people are becoming more electricians, mechanics, stuff that doesn't require college. Because they're finding out that college only worked for people who went to college. When you go to college, and the people that hire you generally went to college, so it was kind of like a club. Oh, you went to college, so I'm going to hire you. Realistically, you look at most of these Fortune 500 companies, you can say, they have master's degrees, and okay, so then why are they screwed a company up? If you got a master's degree, In the state of Kentucky, they want a master's degree to teach kids. And they say they prefer a doctorate. I go, really? I say fire them all at that point. Do you know how much lack of knowledge you have to be that high up in the totem pole? Because the higher up you go, the less, the more dumb things you really learn. And none of it's practical at all. Back in the day, just throwing it out there, for when computers first came into the education space, they taught it in high school. I'm sorry, middle school. Then they went to high school, and they taught classes. Middle school, if I remember right, was part of a math class. Computers. It was basically just basic programming, basic to programming language. Then they went to high school, where they taught academically. So now you went in there and you learned more advanced things, but it was more Pascal, which is more educational. When you went to college, there was a divergence because computers have been out a little while, and the practical side, so the 2-year schools taught the practical side, and the theoretical side was the 4-year schools. 2-year schools were pumping them out, and kids were getting hired and going to school. And then all of a sudden, the 4-year schools were kind of whining a little bit because no one was hiring their people. I go, well, you're teaching them theoretical stuff that no one cares about. Businesses usually pay for productivity, so 2-year schools is the way to go. And then eventually, more and more managers they used to get out of the 4-year schools. And when they started to get more managers, the managers only wanted to hire their own 4-year people to look important and such. So anyway, that's the history of computers, actually. And realistically, back in the day, you didn't need a degree at all to actually work with computers. I think nowadays you just have to be antisocial, and that is a joke. But you have to think not like a human. And by the way, it does not hurt that if you want to work with computers, that actually you think like a computer. It's very beneficial. The binary logic does work really well. But that is how I solve problems from my perspective, being an authentic person, with a little bit of history thrown in there of my history. So I've been doing this, I've been in computers for 40 years. So when I was a child, my stepfather actually used to leave the books around, and I would actually write programs and help. So it actually got pretty good. I got pretty good at it. I got pretty good at COBOL because my first job programming literally was working for a Fortune 500, working with COBOL, which is literally a product that was older than I was. I was born in 68 and it was made in 63. And I was editing code that said 1963 in it. I'm sorry, it said 63. So that's old. And that's when you realize, wow, this stuff's old. Anyway, that's problem solving, according to me. Thank you for listening and have a great day.